My thoughts were spinning, and with a deep breath, I remembered how just the other day, in the middle of a conversation with my sister, she had dropped, "This too shall pass." One of Mom's classic sayings, always wrapped in comfort, reassurance, and love. My chest warmed and a small smile fell upon my lips as I said, "Mom would say that." She giggled. "I know. I call them Wendyisms." I laughed, admiring how her mind worked. She always manages to surprise me, just a little. Then, still chuckling, I asked, "You have a name for them?" "Of course," she said, and then started rattling off all the comforting things Mom used to say when life felt too heavy. Let's be honest, none of her sayings ever erased the pain. Not even close. But they made you think of the faintest glimmer of hope. A reminder that emotions are always shifting, that I'm supported, that it will be okay, that everything will unfold just as it's meant to. Her words quietly shaped the beliefs that still hold me together. My mind kept going back to how she used to say those words through the middle of all of my grief. "This too shall pass." Her voice felt like a soft blanket over the raw, empty silence I felt inside me. I was lost in self-doubt, scared I wasn't enough, and every challenge just made me feel smaller. Guilt and sorrow were like waves pulling me under, and that dark anger in my chest kept whispering that I wasn't worthy. But I held on to that promise that the storm would end. She was right. Emotions come in waves, and somehow I knew I could face them. I was 19 when I woke up one morning and found out my best friend had taken her own life. It felt like the whole world shifted in one breath. This was the girl who smiled through everything, even the stuff that obviously hurt. The girl whose laughter was so contagious, it could light up a whole room and make everyone want to be near her. She was the one who made others laugh, who comforted them with a cheerful, "Smile, girl, it's contagious," or reminding them to "keep your chin up, doll face." She was my first friend in kindergarten, the one I whispered secrets to, the one I rode bikes with, climbed trees with, and played manhunt with until my dad rang the bell for me to come home. She was the same girl who, just like me, got sent to Catholic school as a punishment for skipping class. And she was the same girl who ended up pregnant at 17 by a guy who couldn't be bothered to care, left to figure out how to be a mom when she was still just a kid herself. Her struggles with postpartum depression and mental health were always hidden behind this perfect mask. At her wake, everyone kept saying the same thing, like they were trying to convince themselves, but she was always smiling. Only a few people ever got to see what was really going on beneath it. Over the years, I had only seen glimpses behind it. When she slipped off her bracelets, I saw the scars she tried to hide. When she opened up about her nights alone, I heard the exhaustion in her voice, the quiet breaking. I knew she was struggling more than usual, but I never imagined it would end the way it did. I worried for her. She had been going out a lot lately, chasing distractions, chasing anything that made her feel alive. And when we talked, she felt far away, like her light was fading. Hours before she ended her life, she called me. I didn't answer. I watched her name flash on my phone, Jaya, and let it ring. I was at work, buried in my own chaos, deadlines, and a failing relationship, the noise of my own thoughts. I told myself I'd call her back later, that there would be time, but later never came. And her death consumed me. Grief crashed over me like a tidal wave, and I couldn't breathe beneath its weight. Anger followed right behind it. Anger at her for leaving, at myself for not answering, at God for letting it happen. It was relentless. I sank into a kind of sorrow I had never known before, a deep sadness that clung to me like smoke. It felt like I had absorbed her pain, like the darkness that took her had found a place inside me too. I had never struggled with thoughts like that before, but after losing her, I understood how easily the mind can slip into that space. Pain like that spreads quietly, creeping in until it feels like death itself has a shadow that can settle into your soul. 2 months into that crushing grief, I got the news that Shorty had passed. Another weight dropped. My mom noticed the change. She looked at me one day, worry etched across her face, and asked softly, "Why do you seem so sad?" I told her my truth, raw and unfiltered. I couldn't understand why God would allow it. Why something so cruel and devastating could happen to people who lit up the world just by being in it. Why didn't he protect that kind of light? What was the point of believing and praying if in the end all we were left with was nothing but loss? I told her how I felt my friends were everywhere and nowhere all at once. Their absence screamed in the silence, and yet somehow they still clung to every corner of my life. I could almost feel them. It was like Jaya's pain hadn't died with her. It had moved into me, and in that strange, unbearable way, I felt connected, as if something of them still lingered. At night, my imagination would conjure up conversations with them. It was my mind's way of trying to comfort the pain, trying to make sense of how unfair it felt that their lives had ended so quickly and so unexpectedly. Sometimes I'd hear their laughter echo in my mind, that kind that once filled the world so easily, and for a fleeting second it felt like they were still here. But when the silence came back, it hit harder, and it hung in the air like smoke, visible and present, but impossible to hold. And in that haze, I felt more alone than ever. That was when my mom spoke from her soul. "This too shall pass, my papi Luhu. It's important not to forget how lucky you are." At first, her words didn't make sense. How could she see me as lucky in a moment like this, when everything felt so heavy, so wrong? Lucky? Did she really mean that? I was in disbelief, unable to understand how she could look at me, hollowed out and grieving, and call it luck. For a moment, I thought she might be delusional, but my mom continued, "You're lucky because you can feel the energy of their love. They say the final act of love is grief. To me, her words suggested that grief was a natural and profoundly intense expression of love. That the more intense the grief, the greater the love. That grief could not be separated from love, but instead an extension or manifestation of it. I thought about the pain I had endured because of love, and I knew there was truth in her words. My thoughts were still spiraling, but then I noticed something in her voice, a tone I couldn't ignore, a quiet envy that made me pause. She wasn't just speaking about my grief, because I could tell she had held an invisible weight of her own grievances. I wondered what she had experienced in her own life that left her with such a longing. My thoughts slowed, but then the guilt hit again. How could she possibly relate to this? The feeling of guilt that I had failed as a friend. I had failed Jaya because I thought one more conversation could have saved her life. That I failed Shorty by not staying connected, by not being there when I could have been there. Our conversation lingered in my mind, but the pain remained. The guilt, the sadness, and the confusion did not lift. If anything, it deepened. In the midst of it all, my anger toward God grew, sharp and relentless. I spiraled deeper into my grief, unable to find peace, unable to come up for air. And then, slowly, the anger turned inward, and I began to question myself. How could I have missed the signs? Why didn't I answer the call? Could I have done more? I screamed at him, begged him for answers, but all I received was silence. Every prayer I had whispered for her, every desperate hope I had held on to, suddenly felt meaningless. The silence was deafening, and the rage I felt toward God was consuming. How could he stand by and let this happen? Everything started to feel pointless. I felt useless, hopeless. Shortly after that conversation, it was as if the universe responded, like it had heard the silent pleas I couldn't put into words, as if the cosmos was trying to answer the prayers that had gone unanswered, gently nudging me away from the storm raging inside me, wild and relentless. It felt like the clouds had parted and sunlight breaking through into my grief-stricken world. At that exact moment, my phone rang. It was a friend I had once confided in during a late-night car ride. The kind of conversation where your heart spills out without warning. That's when I told her about Jaya's death. Now, she was calling me to tell me that her aunt, a medium, believed she received a message from Jaya. Her aunt felt compelled to find me, to connect, and was asking if I would come and hear the message. I was skeptical, but curious. I didn't even realize how desperate I was for something, anything, that might resemble closure. I wasn't sure what I believed about mediums or spiritual connections, but something in me said to go. So I set up a time and agreed to the session, uncertain, skeptical, but open. When the medium spoke to me, she stunned me. She started mentioning specific, intimate memories between my friend and me. Afternoons we spent together as children. Things we never shared with anyone else. She could not know these things, It was as if my friend herself had reached across the veil to speak to me. The medium told me that my friend's energy remained, that she was still connected to me in ways I could not fully understand. She spoke of my friend's struggles and how, despite her passing, she was still there, watching over me. Most importantly, the medium helped me release the guilt that had been suffocating me. She told me that my friend had made the choice to leave. It was not my fault. I could not have stopped it. I did not have the power to change her mind or alter her path. That truth lifted a burden I had been carrying for years. For the first time, I was able to let go of the guilt that had gnawed at me, believing I had somehow failed her. It was her choice alone, and I had no control over it. With that message from the medium, something began to shift. Almost immediately, my soul felt lighter, and my heart, full of love, felt open again. I noticed I had space to breathe, but I had been through enough to know that healing does not stop at relief. There was still inner work to do, and the real change would take an intentional action. That moment marked the beginning of my healing, slow, messy, and painful, but also real. I started to realize that my grief was not something I had to carry forever. I could hold it with understanding and then gradually begin to release it. The process did more than soothe the surface. It uncovered deeper layers, old wounds I thought I had already healed, patterns I assumed were behind me. I saw I had only ever touched the edges of my pain, only ever healed fragments of something more rooted. For the first time in a long time, I started prioritizing myself, not just surviving, but truly valuing my self-worth. I began reclaiming my mental health, not in a grand way or sudden way, but steadily, quiet, and intentionally. A couple of years went by, and I was still stuck in a rut of loneliness. Slowly, I started widening my social circles, trying to pull myself out of the depression. I thought I was healing, like I was finally finding my way back to myself. That's when I found love again. But it wasn't the kind of love that I had hoped for. It felt like the universe was just messing with me, throwing one unworthy kind of love after another. One relationship tore me open with betrayal, leaving me reeling from lies and micro-cheating and blatant affairs. Another thrived on manipulation, twisting my words and making me doubt my own reality. One tried to control everything I did, micromanaging my choices, isolating me from the people who cared about me. I encountered someone who was completely self-absorbed, draining my energy while expecting constant admiration. Another was emotionally distant, leaving me chasing affection that never fully came. One seemed addicted to drama, creating chaos and conflict that made stability feel impossible. Another enabled my worst habits, excusing their own behavior while making me feel responsible for their choices. I fell for someone charming at first, only to find emotional traps once I was fully invested. One person seemed to compete with me, undermining my successes and joy as if my happiness threatened them. And another weaponized my empathy, twisting guilt and care into something painful. Every relationship had its own mask, but they all hit me with the same lesson when was I finally going to choose myself? My boundaries were weak. My self-worth felt like something I kept bargaining away. I got stuck in this loop where I thought putting up with emotional chaos somehow proved my value. I kept thinking if I just loved harder, they'd change. I didn't know how to walk away from the dysfunction. I tried giving grace and holding them accountable at the same time. Like that would magically fix things. I kept clinging to the idea that emotions were temporary and that this would pass, even when nothing actually changed. Honestly, all I was doing was digging myself deeper into feelings of worthlessness. I chased scraps of affection and confused pain for proof that I cared enough. I kept hoping that someone who couldn't love me fully would give me what I wanted. Slowly, I realized I had forgotten to value myself, to love myself in the way I tried to love everyone else. I had been giving pieces of my soul to everyone but me. So I did what any lost kid does. I met new people, chased new dreams, and widened my circles again, remembering everything is temporary. Life kept showing up as something new, but somehow that same heartache kept repeating. I wondered if before we entered this life, we chose experiences with other souls meant to shape and challenge us, guiding us toward growth, because why else would we be enduring pain for one another? Could the painful lessons we face be about punishment and maybe more about evolution? More about playing the role to teach one another? Time and time again, I found myself caught in familiar patterns, repeating cycles until I learned my lesson. Why do these cycles persist? Is it only when we recognize them that they stop? Perhaps life isn't about avoiding these patterns, but meeting them with awareness. By making conscious choices and breaking free from what no longer serves us. Do we finally step into the person we're always meant to become once we do? When those toxic relationships finally ended, I was sitting alone, feeling isolated and abandoned, similar to the pains I felt when experiencing death. I was basically forced to face myself. The truth hit me so hard I couldn't ignore it. My worth was never something I had to prove to anyone. Real love is not about constant sacrifice. It is built on reciprocity, kindness, and respect. It taught me that I had to respect my own worth before I could ever invite healthy love into my life. Slowly, I started to understand that my grief, pain, and brokenness were not permanent. They were phases that would either pass or repeat depending on what I learned. The suffering didn't define me. What defined me was my ability to grow from it, to shift, to step into a life where I finally honored myself. I wasn't just someone who had lost a friend or survived a toxic relationship. I was someone learning, evolving, and breaking free from cycles that never deserved me in the first place, because this too shall pass.